Welcome into the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com, digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Roaring. As always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Mason. We've got Bengals to talk about. Oh, do we have some Bengals to talk about? We got some Reds to talk about. You just can't kill them, thanks to the Mets killing themselves. We've got some college football to talk about, including a game that I was fortunate enough to do public address for that was shortened in the second half because the other team was so rotten, and much, much more. So, Rick, we got so much to get to. Let's get to it.
I am thankful to hear that you still have a voice. I thought you might have said touchdown Bearcat so many times that you just couldn't do the podcast this week.
I did the forward third down a lot of times too. That was the one where I had to get my voice down there a little bit. That got to me a little.
Yeah, I can imagine. What a game that you got to witness there. But let's start with the Bengals, Skinny. The news of the week, everyone knows by now, Joe Burrow is out at least 3 months after suffering a turf toe injury that will need surgery. The Bengals have signed Mike White and Sean Clifford. We'll start here. Is your expectation that Joe Burrow will be out the rest of the year?
That would be my expectation. I mean, they're saying 3 months. And I think people take I think it's a minimum of 3 months. And then there's some probably, another ramp up week or two of practice to get to. Listen, I think everybody holds out hope. I think that's what you cling to at the moment, that Jake Browning keeps you in the playoff race and that Joe comes back and wears his cape and takes you to the playoffs and deep into the playoffs. Turf toe is a goofy thing, man. He's got the worst of the worst of it. This has felled some players to the point of retirement. I don't want to alarm people. I just want to prepare you for that. The flip side to it is, if there's one guy I've seen come back from some major surgeries, it's been Joe Burrow, right? Major knee surgery. Now, that's not uncommon in today's place. People come back from knee injuries all the time. Maybe not the way they once were, especially if they're at an advanced stage, but that one's, I don't want to say fairly common. Nothing's common when you're getting your body cut on. But then that wrist surgery was really that one was not just a normal fall off your bike broken wrist. I mean, that thing had some real issues to it. And, we wondered if he was going to make it back from that the way he went in training camp last year. And then all of a sudden he was fine. And now there's this. And so I do know he'll attack it. I know he'll attack the rehab the right way. He'll attack it as hard as he can. If he's able to come back, it would certainly be a bonus.
The thing about that, though, is like you're saying, people are clinging to hope that Jake Browning will play well enough that the Bengals will be in a position. I mean, by the time we're talking Burrow coming back, we're literally talking about the playoffs, basically. He's basically missing the rest of the regular season in a best case scenario based on the timeline given. It does create an interesting situation then if Jake Browning has played well enough to get you into the playoffs at that point or get you right to the cusp of the playoffs. I know Joe Burrow is Joe Burrow and he is a better talent than Jake Browning, but Joe Burrow that sat out for 3 months and that might not be fully mobile and fully himself. Is there a bit of a decision there? Like, if everything were to play out perfectly and he is available to come back for the Bengals and they are actually in a playoff hunt, do you automatically go back to Joe Burrow in that situation, or is there a bit of a decision to be made there?
I'll go back a half century, and that's a long, long, long time ago. There was a certain team that finished undefeated in the NFL, the Miami Dolphins. Their quarterback, Bob Greasy, suffered, I believe, a broken ankle in game number 4 of that season. And old man Earl Morrall came in, guided them to the rest of that perfect season, and lo and behold, in the playoffs, back came Bob Greasy, and he led them to a Super Bowl. So,
is this when they handed the ball off about 45 times, 60?
That is when they handed the ball off about 45 or 50 times a game. That part is correct. I've seen that scenario raised, like if the offense is gelling, of course you go back to Joe Burrow. You don't go back to an 85% Joe Burrow, but yes, of course you go back to Joe Burrow.
But that's the question right there, though, Skinny, right? There's no way of knowing, is Joe Burrow going to be right back to himself right away? And I think after an injury like this, you wouldn't expect that he necessarily would, sitting out 3 straight months and having a bad – and here's the part of the problem. You can't really fully rehab that injury until it's healthy, right?
Yeah,
you can't put a lot of weight and doing a lot of exercise on a surgically repaired toe.
Yeah, I wish it was a story ESPN did this week. It involved a Carolina Panthers cornerback who did this. And he was talking about how, he got it all rehabbed and he felt great. He was doing things in practice like he used to and felt like, okay, I'm back. And then lo and behold, the first snap he played in the game, it went back out on him. That's what this injury can do, apparently. And so it's an interesting question to raise. I would say, though, all things being equal, if it's 100% Joe Burrow that gets back for, let's just say, game 14 and you got 4 more regular season games to go, I'm going back to Joe Burrow. And hopefully it is a tough decision. Hopefully you're like, Jake's made this a tough decision, and I think he could make it a tough decision. I wrote a column this week why the team is so confident, players are so confident, coaches are so confident in Jake Browning, and the fact that I think he can win games. I've seen him do it.
I think all the stuff we just talked about is probably a moot point because as we started the conversation off with, it's likely that Joe Burrow is going to miss the rest of the season, it would seem. There was a lot of talk about the Bengals going out and getting another quarterback. They went out and they got a couple of guys that would seem to just be emergency guys if Jake Browning gets hurt, kind of a backup to Jake Browning situation. No one that's really going to threaten to take that spot over from him unless things really go south for the Bengals and for Jake. I think some people were upset about that. They wanted someone better than Mike White. They wanted a quote unquote competent quarterback option to give this team a chance based on the money they've spent on the weapons and what have you. Was there a name out there? Is there a guy out there that you think they actually could have gotten that would have made you feel more confident than how you feel about Jake Browning?
The only thing I would have considered, and we'll go through a couple of names here in a second, the only thing I would have considered was trading with the Giants to get Jameis Winston. That's the only thing I would have considered. He's their third quarterback. It probably won't cost you much draft capital to get him. You're not bringing Jameis in here to be the starter, but he is a guy who's won games and had major great moments in this league. He's also had some really awful moments in this league. He's a complete and total and utter wild card who just slings it around. But he's also got some good receivers to sling it too. It would be an interesting marriage of him slinging it around to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase eventually. That said, I think, I feel very confident in Jake Browning. I think the only way that Jake doesn't start until Joe Burrow gets back, whenever that is because he gets hurt. I just don't think there's another scenario out there. I saw some names that were floated out there. Taylor Heineke. He threw 5 passes last year. The best days are behind him. Somebody suggested Desmond Ridder. I can't reiterate how bad Desmond Ridder was in training camp. And I like Desmond. I thought it was a great signing. I mean, here's a guy that's just a couple of years removed. I mean, he's 8-9 as a starter in this league and started, as recently as 2 years ago as a regular starter. And so I thought, okay, great signing. So you got some time to maybe mold him. I think we talked about this on the podcast. You got time to let him, kind of be groomed, if you will, and worked on here, and hopefully eventually slide into that backup role to Jake Browning. And he was just so bad that it was never going to work out. I know some people talked about Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins' salary cap hit is significant, and contract is significant to the point where you'd have to ask Atlanta, hey, you're going to have to burden much of this $40 million load. And you know what Atlanta's going to do? What do you think Atlanta's going to do? We want a first round pick and a second round pick. And then we'll take the money, and then you can have her. No, they're just. And I think Zach summed it up yesterday. He said we looked at the quarterbacks that were available. We thought these were the best 2 guys, and the best 2 guys that fit us.
Yeah, and I mean, whether they're the best 2 guys that the Bengals could possibly get or not, I have no idea, and I don't know how relevant that is. Jameis Winston, you could maybe talk me into, okay, that does something for me. That's potentially a better option, probably a better option than Jake Browning in this situation. But I think if you're a Bengals fan, you want Jake Browning to be their best chance here.
Yes.
I'm not saying he necessarily will be. Maybe you could go out and find someone on the scrap heap or a Jameis Winston that is better than Jake Browning, but you don't want that to be the case if you're a Bengals fan. You want Jake Browning to play really well because one, he's the guy with the best circumstances. He knows your system. He's been in it for multiple years. He knows the teammates. He knows it. He's the most seamless transition for everybody else around him. And he's going to be the most confident in terms of what you're running and his ownership of the offense. In addition to that, there is still the possibility that there's upside with Jake Browning.
Yeah.
We've seen flashes. We saw him play half of an NFL season and it was up and down, but he had some moments that were pretty good, and it looked like you could put a competent offense behind a guy like him. Heck, there were teams that were interested in him after that season talking about, let's take a chance on this guy's our starter if we can get him for the right price here. So I think that if you're a Bengals fan, that's what you're hoping for, is that there's still upside there with Jake Browning. We really haven't seen him get his full chance to shine as an NFL starter yet. Maybe this is that, and with the time that he's built up in the system and his knowledge of it and then his comfortability with his teammates, maybe that'll be enough for him to do really good things. In my opinion, if you're a Bengals fan, that's honestly your best hope.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, ESPN rated Jake as the second best backup quarterback in the NFL. I would probably concur. I would tell you that if I had to rate quarterbacks 1 to 30, he'd probably be 25 or 26 on the list, to be quite frank. That's right. And maybe even a little bit higher than that. I think Jake is extraordinarily competent. So I wrote a column about that why there's confidence. And here's the other thing. You remember after that 2023 season, there was a faction that said, man, trade him. You can get some value for him. This is why you don't trade him, for the instance just like you're in right now when you think you've got a playoff caliber, Super Bowl caliber team, and when the quarterback goes down, you better have someone competent to step in and take the reins.
Yeah. Now, I mean, my opinion is this is no longer a Super Bowl caliber team. They were a Super Bowl caliber team because of Joe Burrow. Without him, with the defense that they have brought into this year, I mean, most of my hope is gone that this team is going to contend for anything real. But here's my part about it and why I think it can still be a very fun season. The Bengals haven't made the playoffs that many damn times since I've been alive. Right. So them making the playoffs would still be fun. And you turning this over to, yes, it's Jake Browning, but they're 2-0. He's got a 2-0 head start.
Yep.
And he's got the talent that he has around him. They could still make the playoffs, and playing in the playoffs is fun. Like that would be, I'm not saying it's what I wanted out of the season. I'm not saying it's the expectation now for Bengals fans, but if they were to make the playoffs with Jake Browning, this would still be a fun season. And I still think that is possible.
I do too. I very much do. I'm bullish on Jake Browning. I was when he took, look, once you saw him play a sample size of games, you're like, okay, the first start against Pittsburgh was meh. And that's the first start ever for that guy. And they may have not let him take the reins off. They may have had a game plan that was very simple for him because they didn't know. And I know that's what Zach kind of alluded to that yesterday when he's like, back to that first start, we really didn't know what we had. And now we do. We kind of know we got a competent guy.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also possible. I think it's equally possible. I was talking about the upside that Jake Browning may still have. Maybe he's even better than what we've seen. Maybe he blossoms into a legitimate NFL starter. I think it's also possible that he stinks. Like we saw him before that year before he basically got thrust in the limelight and showed that he could play a little bit in actual NFL game action. That preseason, you were debating between him and some other terrible backup quarterback. Trevor Siemian, which was worse. I mean, both of them stunk in that preseason, and we thought they were terrible. So
it is interesting. Jake has not had great training camps. I mean,
it seems like that every year.
And honestly, maybe he's just a guy that he's a gamer. And there are guys like that, right? I mean, right or wrong, there are guys who, when the game's on, they're better.
Yeah. So I don't know if you have any more thoughts on Jake Browning, but I do. My big takeaway from that is I don't know how this is going to go. I think he has a chance to keep them in playoff contention, and ultimately, I think he's the Bengals fans' best chance of having a fun season.
Yeah, I will say this, and it was the theme coming into the year, with or without Joe Burrow. This defense was going to have to still get better than what it's shown through first two games. I mean, they've lived off turnovers, and listen, that's kind of their mantra. They want to create turnovers, and they have created some. I mean, they've forced some. Now, Trevor Lawrence also throws right to Daxon in the end zone because Trevor Lawrence does stupid things at times. So you've gotten somewhat lucky there. I even asked Al Golden yesterday. We talked to him, and I said, what can you do to create more pass rush than just Trey? And he said, that's kind of my charge at the moment. I got to figure out ways to do that. I said, I don't want you to tip your hand, but does that mean you got to blitz more? You got to be more aggressive? He said, I just got to be better at creating pressures for us. And so maybe that does mean they blitz more. Maybe he figures out to get better ways to get one-on-ones. But I don't think Myles Murphy's getting any better, man. I wish I could say he is. I think Joseph Osai's been okay. You've gotten very little push up the middle. Chris Jenkins hasn't done anything. TJ Slayton and BJ Hill have done okay against the run, but they've given you really no pressures. I mean, outside of Trey Henderson, there's been, and Joseph Osai a little bit. You've got no pressure on the quarterback. And I don't know how that changes unless you just say, to hell with it, man. Here we come. And we're just going to hopefully create an extra turnover here, get you in a negative play every once in a while because we're not getting a lot of stops.
I did like when they had Hendrickson lined up and Shamar Stewart lined up at the tackle right inside of him in a pass rushing situation. And then you had, I guess, Osai on the other end. I'm not that Shamar's done a whole lot yet, but I do think those two next to each other creates a problem for offensive line, just trying to control those two.
Yes, I do too, except for one problem. Shamar's not going to play for 2 or 3 games. So there's that.
Yeah. I mean, I like that look though.
I do too. No, I'm with you.
Going forward, that might give them a chance when he gets back.
Yeah, I think you play a lot of games with those two, a lot of twist games and stunts with those two. I really do.
It just feels like a lot to handle when they're next to each other on the same side. You got a lot to think about there, just physically matching up with those guys. I'm sure you've seen the comparisons to Andrew Luck, the stats about how many times Burrow's been sacked and how many times Luck was sacked and the number of injuries he suffered and everything. How much do you think this is all taking a toll on Joe Burrow?
It's a good question because I think that's the thing you never take into account, the mental toll that a rehab takes. I do think he's single-minded that I'm going to get back to playing football. I don't want this as a knock on Andrew Luck. I get it. Andrew Luck, I think he had interests far-ranging other than just football and got to the point of I'm not doing this again. I've got my life ahead of me. I've got enough money now. I'll do.
And always did, right? Like he went to Stanford.
No, right. That's right.
He didn't go to Ohio State and LSU. He went to Stanford for a reason.
Joe's a smart guy. I mean, Joe can do a lot of things, but Joe's also going to have generational wealth in his back pocket that he's not going to need to do anything other than avocations and hobbies for goodness sakes. So.
And Joe, I think it's pretty clear that Joe's a football guy. I mean, his dad was a football coach. I think it is different circumstances in terms of who those two guys are.
Yes, and that's where I think the comparisons are fair because it's get hurt, rehab, get hurt, surgery, rehab, get hurt, surgery, rehab. And I do think it takes a mental toll. But I think this guy is just so single-minded about football that his only thought is, how can I work hard enough or as hard as I can without overdoing it, as hard as I can to get myself back as fast as I can. So I think it's a little bit different. I do want to talk about a lazy narrative that's out there, Rick, and you're probably going to disagree with it, which is fine. Everybody's pointing the finger at this injury at the offensive line, and the Bengals haven't addressed the offensive line. Yeah. Well, I would come back with this. And I thought Zach gave a great answer. I thought it was a terrific answer. He said all 11 players were culpable for that injury. That includes Joe Burrow. Receivers couldn't get off the line of scrimmage. So Joe looked the second time, both guys jammed up. At that point, the offensive line started to break down, to which point Joe Burrow tried to do Joe Burrow things and escape. And sometimes when you try to escape on unscripted plays, you're going to get hurt. And that's how he got hurt. So he's as much to blame too for that. I'll go to the other, that the Bengals have not addressed offensive line. Well, let me just ask you this. Did you want T. Higgins signed or not? The answer for most people was yes. Well, it cost you $30 million to do that. If you had chosen not to, could you have used that $30 million to allocate to help the offensive line? Yeah, probably. I don't know what great guard. I looked up some of the guards. I mean, the guards in the free agent market this year, as I look back on it, weren't all that great. So I don't know if you were going to go pluck a guard and pay that guy $15 to $18 million and make it better. But you signed Orlando Brown in his prime, correct? Everybody was yippee about that one. You signed Ted Karras, and you like Ted Karras enough to extend him not just once, but now extend him a second time. You used your first-round pick last year on a right tackle. You addressed that through the draft. This year, you drafted a third-round guard and plugged him as a day one starter. I consider, I think you do too, I consider anybody drafted in the first 3 rounds a premium draft pick, that those guys need to contribute right away. And
especially if you're talking about offensive linemen, yeah. Yeah.
And so right guard, I can give you that. But then they also realized they were a little thin and went and signed guy everybody loved in Dalton Reiser. So tell me when the pie is not that big because of it. And at the time of the free agent stuff, you didn't quite know where the Trey Hendrickson contract situation was going to land. So you needed to allocate some money for that. So again, what did you want them to do, folks?
This is the narrative that I agree with you completely. That I just don't see a ton of merit. Now, could they do a better job of all of this? Sure. Have they hit on all the guys that they've tried to hit on? No, they've missed. But I mean, even going back to La'el Collins, Skinny, they have invested in trying to protect Joe Burrow since the Super Bowl year.
I wrote that column. It's actually up at local12.com. I wrote it yesterday afternoon. And I even talked about it. After that Super Bowl season, they went out and signed Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, La'el Collins, and drafted Cordell Volson. You didn't have to like it, but he was a starter for 3 years. So he did do some competent things, and he started on an AFC championship team. So he did do some competent things, right? So again, you can argue they haven't addressed it to your liking as a fan. There's so many offensive line problems. Just watch any other games. There's so many offensive line problems across this league. It's tough to hit on that position. I'm sorry that it is. I wish the Bengals are not in a vacuum in this.
Well, and I certainly don't want to get into the whole, calling Joe Burrow fragile or anything like that. But there are other quarterbacks who get hit a lot in the NFL, and they don't get injured as much as Joe Burrow has. Some of this is just the nature of the sport and bad luck and things. Now, has Joe Burrow gotten sacked more than anybody else in whatever the last 5 or 6 years, whatever the stat is? Yes, I've seen the stat. But also, there are a lot of things going on with that stat. There's the fact that Joe Burrow will openly tell you, hey, on third downs, I like to take sacks. I think I can make big plays in those situations. So I intentionally will hold on to the ball too long and take a sack if we're going to punt it. So there's, and the Bengals had their issues going back that we talked about. They tried to address them. So there are more things than just the Bengals haven't done enough to protect Joe Burrow with the offensive line. Now, this year is the first year that I do think you can argue They put other priorities. The last couple of years, they have clearly tried to go out and address the offensive line to the best of their ability. This year, they clearly chose other priorities instead of finding an extra offensive lineman. And they also, because I think of a couple of the contract situations, maybe the Trey Hendrickson thing floating out there, they waited and waited and waited to add a guy like Dalton Risner, who's going to be your backup. Maybe you can make the argument if Dalton Risner, whoever that extra guard was going to be, was in camp longer and wasn't thrown in the spotlight, maybe they have a better chance and they're not getting beat around the way Dalton Risner was in this game. Okay, fair enough. But I agree. I don't think that narrative holds a lot of water that the Bengals haven't invested in the offensive line or tried to protect Joe Burrow. I think they could do better for sure, but I don't have a big issue with that personally.
I mean, how many Kansas City Chiefs games have you watched Patrick Mahomes run around like a crazy man, like a chicken with his head chopped off because he's trying to extend plays? That's the way he plays. And we've seen him get hurt at times doing that, right? I mean,
and everyone's told me Lamar Jackson isn't going to last because he takes too many hits and he runs around and all this other stuff. Well, I don't know. He seems to be fine. They seem to be winning a lot still. So
yeah. The other part of this equation then is moving forward. Do you, whenever Joe Burrow gets back, whenever that time frame is, do you have to tell him, hey, man, you just need to start throwing the ball away more and live to play another day? Now, the yin to that yang is he's created a lot of big plays on unscripted plays. And do you want to take that away from him? Because I think unscripted plays in the NFL, those scramble drill plays, I think are really hard for defensive backs, right? I mean,
yeah, that's what makes Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson them. That's why they are who they are. If you take that away, is he still Joe Burrow?
But it goes back to then, has he taken enough of the hits and some of that he's brought on himself to the point where you just have to say, look, we can't let you get hit again. I thought Rocky Boyman on the radio the other day made a good point. He played with Peyton Manning in Indy. I mean, he's like, Peyton and Tom Brady are kind of statues. I mean, they never scramble much. He goes, they didn't get hurt all that much either. Now, Tom did get hurt one year, as we know, missed a year. And again, you're going to get hit and hurt as much as you throw the ball. But I think those guys, their lesson was, I'm just throwing it away. I'm not going to take the hit. I'm not going to risk the play. But it is such a yin and yang circumstance that I get why Joe Burrow does what he does, because he's made a lot of spectacular plays out of pocket. But, maybe now you just go, hey, if you see an easy escape route, yeah, go ahead and take that. But if it's a muddy pocket and they're there, just either kill the ball or just honestly go into surrender cobra and call it a day.
Yeah, I think that gets awfully complicated for a competitive guy to diagnose that. You always think it's easy enough that you can squeeze it through there, that you can make that play, and you don't always do it. And by the way, like, this play wasn't that. And this is the play he got hurt on. It didn't actually look like that much in the moment. It just kind of seemed like a normal football play. There was another play earlier in the game where I can't even remember exactly did he lose the balls he was throwing or whatever, but he chased a loose ball.
He tried to
pump fake and it slipped.
No, he tried to hold up. He was trying to do a back shoulder throw to Jamar because I saw Jamar running the route. Jamar wasn't even out of his break yet, and I think he wasn't quite sure because it was well covered. And I think he tried to, at the last second, I don't want to throw that, and then it slipped out of his hand.
So he fumbled, and he goes chasing after it, right?
Yep.
And dives into a defender who dives directly into his hand and wrist and thumb and all that. And I thought at that moment, I was like, oh, that's it. That's like he just broke his hand or dislocated his thumb or something. When that happened, I was so thankful that he didn't end up hurt on that play. So, I mean, there are just so many different things. And Skinny, here's the other part of it. I think there's two things that make Joe Burrow special compared to other NFL quarterbacks. One is his ability to make that broken play, the extended play, the Burrow magic that we saw at LSU and we've seen with the Bengals. And the other is his ability to diagnose things and read defenses. And maybe that's where you hope maybe he can lean on that part of it more and become more like a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady. But we're talking about him changing his style and maybe not running as much. At some point, do you worry about, does he start to see ghost? Does he get a little, happy feet back there when he's in the pocket? I mean, I think Carson Palmer was never the same after the Kimo von Oelhoffen situation because of that. I think he saw ghost in the pocket.
He had a pretty long career after that, though.
He did, but he was never the type of quarterback he was right before that. And I think a lot of that had to do with he started sailing balls. He didn't want to stand in the pocket as much. I think he got nervous, at least for a few years, and it changed who he was. I worry about that with Burrow going forward. Like, is there some point where he starts being worried about taking hits and being injured?
Can I give you my hot take? And this is a hot take. I think something was wrong with his wrist. I think the wrist was bothering him. And I think that throw where he held up and it squeezed out was evidence of that. He didn't trust to make that throw. I think on the one play he got hurt, I think he didn't trust to make a tight window throw on that one. He didn't look good during that game for the most part. He was 7 of 13. Cleveland, I mean, didn't really make great connections down the field. I wonder, he got a lot of work in camp, obviously. Did he overwork himself in camp? Because he didn't look right in the first game plus he played. And I just wonder, because that was always the talk about this wrist, that, you know, the reoccurrence of something with it is very real, that maybe it's just sore and bugging him.
He should have played more piano in the offseason.
Yes, sir.
I did not bring my tinfoil hat for this podcast. I did not be doing Burrow conspiracy theories, but I like that, Skinny. So your argument is Browning might be better than Burrow now because Burrow wasn't even 100%.
Yeah, it's a healthy Jake Browning.
That's a hell of a spin zone right there.
The one fact I can give you out of all of this is that Jake Browning is healthy at the moment. That's the one fact I can definitively give you.
I mean, I think we'll take that. I don't know if there's any other directions to go with this. Was there anything else you had that you found interesting from all of that?
No, I mean, it's I know people have kind of tossed in the towel. They're already talking about trading Terry Hendrickson at the trade deadline and all that stuff. Let it play out a little bit, man. Let the next few weeks breathe, and let's just see where we shake out after the next few weeks. Maybe it will be doom and gloom. Maybe near the trade deadline, that scenario can be popped up. But you're 2-0, and you have a real chance to go beat a team that's a little wounded, even though it's in their place this weekend. And so let it breathe a little.
Yeah, I mean, we're not big on doing the whole tell fans how to fan thing, and I'm not super Mr. Optimistic of like you should never tank and you should always try to win every game guy. But like the idea of tanking after the Bengals started the season 2-0 is insane. How many times have the Bengals been 2-0 in your lifetime, regardless of how old you are listening to this? And I mean, just within the last quarter century, this team has a chance to make the playoffs still. You take that as an NFL fan. You take that as a Bengals fan for sure. Who knows where it'll go? Maybe they'll lose the next 5 games in a row for all I know. But I think with the talent that they have on the offensive side of the ball, they still have a chance to be in most NFL games, even with Jake Browning back there. Yep. So we'll see what happens.